5 divers trapped inside a 30-inch, 1,200-foot oil-filled pipeline deep beneath the sea. No air, no oxygen, just suffocating darkness and the overwhelming fear of death. With each passing moment, their fight for survival grew more desperate. Only one of them would make it out alive to share the chilling truth of what happened. The story would have been hard to believe if it weren't for the GoPro camera one of the divers had, capturing every terrifying moment. This is the heart-wrenching story of the Paria Diving Incident. On February 25, 2022, at the Berth 6 platform in Pointe-à-Pierre, 5 LMCS employees, Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagasa, Yusuf Henry, and Christopher Boudram were assigned maintenance work on a dormant pipeline owned by Paria Fuel Company, a state-operated oil firm in Trinidad and Tobago. The pipeline, a 30-inch U-shaped structure laid along the seabed, was designed to transport oil from Berth 6, where ships unload, to the refinery at Berth 5. Despite the inherent risks, the 5-person dive team was highly skilled and experienced. To begin their work, they positioned an air tube inside a unique habitat known as a diving bell, an 8-foot cube-shaped structure. This specialized enclosure created a dry workspace by displacing water from the pipeline's opening using compressed air, forming a pressurized air pocket that pushed out seawater. This setup allowed the divers to remove their gear and use their tools safely within the work zone, a routine task they had performed countless times. However, something went tragically wrong. 2 weeks prior, an inflatable plug had been installed to prevent oil leakage and potential contamination. Though the pipeline was not active at the time, it could be reactivated if needed. This setup, referred to in the industry as dead legs, comes with significant risks and requires careful hazard assessments, thorough planning, and constant monitoring. Despite the required safety measures, it seemed the company might not have taken adequate precautions. Following orders, the divers descended to the worksite, unaware of the impending disaster. Unknown to them, the inflatable plug was under pressure from both the high-pressure air in the diving bell and the lower-pressure air in the pipeline, a deadly combination. As Kazim Ali Jr. handed a wrench to his crewmates inside the diving bell, they began loosening the valve securing the inflatable plug. With no warning, releasing the plug caused an instantaneous pressure drop, transforming the inside of the pipe into a powerful vacuum. The force was irresistible, violently sucking in air, water, tools, and tragically the men themselves. A torrent of seawater surged into the diving bell, turning it from a safe workspace into a watery death trap. The sudden influx of water created an overwhelming force that pulled the divers into the dark, narrow pipeline. Within moments, they were hurled through the pipe by a brutal current of water and oil, struggling to breathe and fighting for survival. After a harrowing 90 seconds of being swept through the pipeline, the divers finally came to a stop, disoriented and injured. Assessing their surroundings, they realized they were trapped in the pipe but had landed in an air pocket, allowing them to breathe, at least temporarily. Christopher Boudram, the sole survivor, recounted the horrifying ordeal.
Tornado, everything just spinning and beating you up, and it happened so fast, I couldn't react. The only thing I remember able to do was cover my head, like in the fetal position. After that, all I remember, I didn't even remember actually getting pulled in the pipe. I just remember going hurled through the pipe at unbelievable speeds. I couldn't hold my breath no longer, my throat. And you're holding your breath for too long, after a while, your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you see a noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. You're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning. Your ears ringing. Your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was gonna dead.
The men were imprisoned inside the 1,200-foot oil pipeline, gripped by fear and confusion. Despite their injuries and desperate circumstances, they encouraged one another, trying to maintain hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. Every moment of their struggle was recorded on the GoPro camera, capturing the sounds of their desperate efforts to escape and the chilling reality of their predicament. At first, Chris thought they had been pulled in headfirst and assumed they needed to crawl backward to escape. However, the others believed they had entered feet first. Trusting the majority's judgment, Chris adjusted their escape plan, positioning himself at the front. Chris placed his feet on Kazim's shoulders while instructing Kazim to link up with the others. Faisal, who was at the back, was asked to push the group forward. The men formed a human chain, determined to crawl through the slick, oil-coated pipeline in complete darkness. Their progress was agonizingly slow. The pipeline's slippery interior, combined with their injuries and exhaustion, made every inch a struggle. Breathing became increasingly difficult as oil fumes filled the confined space. Their bodies ached from broken bones, searing throat pain, and burning eyes. During their crawl, They stumbled upon 2 oxygen tanks with regulators still attached. Chris warned the group that breathing the air inside the pipe could cause dizziness and nausea. He suggested taking small, controlled breaths from the oxygen tanks to stay conscious and clear-headed. As they moved forward, water levels inside the pipeline rose dangerously. Chris noticed that some of his crewmates were struggling to breathe and had become immobilized by their injuries. Realizing the dire situation, he decided to check how far they could go before the rising water trapped them completely. To his horror, Chris discovered that the next segment of the pipeline was fully submerged. With only 2 oxygen tanks shared among 5 men, proceeding further was a death sentence. Their fight for survival had reached its most desperate point, leaving them with few options and diminishing hope. Chris understood that attempting to escape together could cause panic and end in disaster. Faced with this harsh reality, he made the toughest decision of his life to leave alone in search of help. Preparing himself for the difficult conversation, Chris explained the situation to the others. They agreed it was their only hope and gave him one of the oxygen tanks. With determination, Chris promised to return with help. Despite agreeing, Kazim couldn't bear to let Chris go and held onto his foot. Chris had no choice but to pull free and leave. Unsure of his direction and how much air he had left, Chris swam through the flooded passage with the oxygen tank ahead of him, hoping to find another air pocket soon. The submerged pipeline had occasional air pockets, offering brief moments of relief. After pushing through the water, he noticed his oxygen running low. Trusting his survival instincts, he took his last breath from the tank. As if guided by fate, his tank struck something metallic, a second oxygen tank. Scrambling in the darkness, he found its regulator, though it lacked a mouthpiece. Desperate, he pushed the entire piece into his mouth. The taste was revolting, like swallowing old motor oil, but he managed a life-saving breath. Knowing he couldn't stop, Chris pushed forward with every bit of strength, uncertain how long he could survive or if his companions were still alive. After struggling through the murky pipeline, he reached another air pocket but knew his only escape was further ahead. Exhausted but determined, he pressed on through the tight, pitch-black tunnel. His eyes burned, his throat ached, and his body was drained, but he refused to give up. The next section of the pipe was partially flooded. He found another oxygen tank and faced the last submerged stretch before the riser. At that moment, he heard Faisal calling his name. Faisal had followed him. He pleaded with Chris to wait before tackling the last flooded section, but time was running out and Chris couldn't delay any longer. After making sure Faisal had an oxygen tank, Chris pressed on alone, hoping the next bend would lead to freedom. Every second felt like an eternity as he swam toward what he prayed was the riser. Either this was berth 5, which was sealed off by a plug, or this was berth 6, where they came from. He kicked off toward what he hoped was salvation. Despite overwhelming fatigue, Chris forced himself to keep moving. Finally, he reached the top of the pipeline, gasping for air. His ordeal was far from over. Once safe, Chris recounted his harrowing experience to the medical team, sharing every detail he could remember about the men's location. However, the LMCS rescue team doubted his story. They believed the pipeline was entirely flooded with oil and that the oxygen tanks wouldn't last more than an hour. Rescue divers from the LMCS team knocked on the pipe, hoping for a response. Relief washed over them when someone knocked back, a sign the men were still alive. Yet, figuring out how to rescue them proved challenging. As the hours dragged on, the trap divers endured worsening conditions, depleting air, choking oil fumes, rising water, and toxic carbon dioxide. Despite initial hopes that Paria Trading Company and LMCS would mount a rescue, no help came. Days later, the company retrieved the divers' bodies. The exact time of death remained unclear. Officials concluded they likely survived until Saturday, though some suspected at least one lasted until Monday. Following the tragedy, authorities in Trinidad and Tobago launched an official investigation into the events of the Paria diving disaster. Christopher Boudram appeared before the commission, reliving his nightmare in heart-wrenching detail.
At this stage, I still not sure if we're going in the correct direction.
Right.
I still not sure if I going and swim to boat 5 and bounce up a blank, or if I swim further away from the rescue, because everything inside me open a rescue going on. Everything inside me open a rescue was going on. Nobody was making an attempt to rescue me. You know what I mean?
This story underscores the importance of rigorous safety protocols and accountability in high-risk industries. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more related videos.